Joe has been the leader of the Ethical Culture Society of Bergen County since 1974. He has 2 master's degrees and a doctorate in religion from Columbia University, where he taught courses on the history of ideas and on religion. Since 2000, Joe has conducted seminars in the graduate division at Columbia on human rights and human rights in religion. He's also taught in the Honors College at Hunter College, Fairleigh Dickinson University, and the United Nations University for Peace in San Jose, Costa Rica. Joe has been especially committed to applying humanist principles to the struggle for social justice. This morning, Joe's title is The Worst Angels of Our Nature, Immoral Leadership in High Places. Now, please welcome.
Right. It's so great to see you, despite the upbeat title of my address this morning. Right? Great to see you all. So many people who are members, veteran members, as well as friends of the Society. If you've been coming around to the Ethical Society for quite a while and are interested in exploring membership, I should say at the tail end of our lunch today, to which you're all invited, we are having an orientation meeting, so we would certainly like you to stay. As mentioned last night, we had a marvelous dinner, a very warm dinner, in which we installed our new officers. And let me be among those to extend my gratitude to Susan Lesh for having won the election as president. That's an inside joke, since we have what I like to call Stalinist elections. You can either vote yes or no. But she is elected as our president and has taken on the mantle of responsibility. And there are great responsibilities in organizing this very robust and complex organization. But I think given what we're about, given our mission, and given the really marvelous people who comprise this community, are tremendous rewards as well. So we all look forward to your stewardship, to working with you, and doing what you say when you tell us to do it. So we're very grateful. Okay, I'm going to return to a theme which I've talked about many times. I've talked about a few other things this year because I think we continue to remain in a state of emergency with regard to the prospects for American freedom and democracy as we've known it and appreciate it and want to support it. Felix Adler, the founder of Ethical Culture, when asked about the purpose of the movement that he had started, responded by saying that its highest purpose, our highest purpose, is to nurture in each man and woman what he referred to as, quote, ethical personality. By ethical personality, he meant our ability to recognize moral ideals, affirm their importance, and strive to live by them. By trial and error over a lifetime, he believed we could refine our characters and inch closer to the ideal, while of course never truly achieving it. For us mortals, ideals inspire, but their attainment, by definition, is always at least somewhat beyond our reach. Adler believed that the best way to move towards ethical personality is by actively engaging in the lives of our fellow human beings and engaging in the life of the community. There is no substitute for experience. But he said that it would also be helpful from time to time to read the biographies of illustrious men and women who are moral exemplars, and learning from them. We human beings are social creatures, and as such we learn from others. This pertains not only to intellectual knowledge, but more intimately with regard to learning how to be a human being among other human beings. We learn from others in order to grow into ourselves. When we are small, much of this learning starts with imitation. As we grow older, imitation may morph into its softer variant of emulation. And later, we developmentally make use of inspiration in order to become the type of person we want to be. Though everyone prides himself on being an autonomous individual, it's my view that holding other people as objects of regard and esteem is in fact a profound need of the human soul. If this were not the case, we would not have Hollywood actors or rock stars or sports figures to attract our attention and sometimes even to fixate on. In similar regard, I believe that authority is also a deep-seated human need. We often find need to respect and esteem our teachers, our mentors, our coaches, other significant people in our lives, and of course, by definition, our heroes. We need to look up to others, I think, for guidance, for leadership, for knowledge and wisdom, and perhaps to compensate for the confidence and strengths that we ourselves may lack. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with this. Indeed, it's a very human disposition. In my view, it's a personal limitation and a misfortune if a person is so cynical and misanthropic that he or she cannot admire another human being. As Adler again put it, we live in the radiations. We live in the radiations of other people, including those whom we look up to. But beyond respect, esteem, and admiration, as Sigmund Freud discovered, there's a psychological tendency to project onto others, often in inflated ways, and especially onto authority figures, abilities and virtues which they may not in fact have. This tendency to project magnifies the authority that others have over us, especially in regard to the impression that they leave and in their power to influence our thinking, our dispositions, and our behaviors. In psychotherapy, this projection can be actually put to very good advantage by a skilled therapist. In the hands of others less benign, this projected, inflated authority can become oppressive and disastrous. A relative example of this is that Americans tend to project a great deal of authority and influence onto our presidents. In significant ways, this projection is analogous to the authority subjects project onto their kings or monarchs in nations where monarchies still exist. Beyond the actual political authority and power of the president, I believe that there is this added authority which is psychological and strengthens the ability of the head of government to influence and mold attitudes and behaviors. This includes the power to mold the moral attitudes and disposition of society at large. This superadded psychological and moral dimension is perhaps clarified in countries where the monarch, again for example, has little or no political power. The power possessed by the Queen of England, for example, is almost totally symbolic, yet it is great power nonetheless. As an object of respect and veneration, she possesses the power of holding the British people together, of representing their common history, which further binds British subjects to one another, of raising their national pride, and she stands for such values as tradition, honor, nobility, patriotism, and a group narcissism that highlights the uniqueness of the British character and the glory of the British past. Though no doubt the British royal family is almost politically powerless and in a practical sense virtually useless, and moreover, I would argue, a significant drain on the British budget. I suspect that if put to a referendum, a majority of the English would vote to retain the monarchy because of the vitally symbolic and moral functions that it plays in the lives of British people. Again, the President of the United States, I think, plays an analogous symbolic role in a very different key and without the pomp and reverence which accompanies the crown. And there is a great power in that component of his role to shape moral attitudes and behaviors. We live in our projections and in our symbols. We may not view the president as a symbol of empire, but we do project onto the office of the presidency and the person certain values, such as honesty, magnanimity, generosity, the dignity of the office, among others. Okay. We expect and want our president to exemplify these values, even if he doesn't. And the important point is that because of his unique and extraordinary authority and power, the president reciprocally reinforces these values and others in society at large. In short, the president of the United States has two lines of authority and two agendas, so to speak. The first relates, obviously, from the policies and programs that he proclaims and executes. The second is his moral authority, which devolves from the moral values that he himself exemplifies, augmented by the authority that people project onto him and onto the office. In other words, the president, in addition to other things, is unavoidably a most powerful moral teacher who, by virtue of his own moral behavior, can serve to strengthen or weaken the moral fiber of society as a whole. Think, for example, of the tremendous symbolic power as a person that FDR had. Okay, my parents loved Franklin Roosevelt, as did a whole swath of the American public, and they saw him from the point of view as a type of protective father figure, okay, as a repository of certain moral values that was uplifting. And think of, for example, in my own day, of John Kennedy and the personality that Kennedy basically presented and what he stood for beyond the actual empirical realities of his political power. In fact, considering society as a whole, it is hard to imagine a more influential moral teacher in the American context. Now, I should say, friends, I think it's more than clear where this platform address is headed. But before I get to the case at hand, another general point. Shared moral values, are one of the most powerful forces, I think, that holds any society together. It's our social glue, so to speak. Take, for example, the most basic moral assumption, namely that people are generally honest and seek to tell the truth under normal circumstances. If we could not hold to this fundamental baseline assumption, there simply could be no trust among human beings. And if there is no trust among us, each of us would end up isolated and alone. No society, therefore, would be possible. And because we all need each other to survive, we would all soon perish in our isolation. At the deepest level, society and the very physical existence of all the individuals who make it up are dependent on the moral value of honesty being the applied assumption. When I ask a stranger for directions somewhere, I assume that that person is probably not going to consciously try to deceive me for whatever reason. They may be mistaken in the information they give, but their intentionality is going essentially to be truthful. That honesty, in effect, is the ultimate coinage of sociality and the social glue that holds us together. When that value, on the other hand, is undermined or weakened, society, the social fabric itself begins to be weakened and compromised. Okay. We often assume that it is law backed up by executive power, that is the force that holds us together as a society. And this is certainly true. But I think that further reflection brings us to the realization that law, which is a very powerful civilizing element, is itself built upon a foundation, a substructure of shared moral conventions. It is often said that law can regulate behavior, but you simply can't legislate morality. Okay? I think this is mostly true, but I think it's overstated. I don't think it's totally true. By constraining behavior by law, which uses the fear of punishment, which is what law does, over time, by beginning to act differently, I think people's moral attitudes can indeed slowly change. I think law does play a role in over time, changing people's moral behaviors. But I do assert that it is mostly the other way around. Moral attitudes and conventions first percolate up from the ground, and then afterwards we write laws which reflect these emerging values and convictions and strive to enforce them. For example, we have new laws that protect gay marriage, laws which did not exist 20 years ago. But before we had such laws, we first had to have a change in attitudes, values, conventions, and norms, and laws were then afterwards written to reflect these changes on the ground that had first come into existence. Moral values are the foundation, the substructure of society. Laws, in effect, are a superstructure. I like to tell my human rights students that human rights are encoded into international law, did not simply emerge full-blown out of the mind of some legal philosopher with a spontaneous birth as if they came out of the head of Zeus, okay? But human rights and its laws, whether we're talking about the right to free speech or the right to practice your religion or the right to health care, etc., emerged out of concrete historical struggles at various points in history as a result of changing moral values and changed conditions. So it is with law in general and its ultimate basis in moral values and conventions. So here the two pillars of my talk come together in the person of Donald J. Trump. The president who, by virtue of his office and personal authority, has great power to shape moral values for good and ill, and the place of morality in serving as the glue upon which a civilized life and the very fabric of society depends. Though difficult to gauge and quantify with great accuracy, it is my view that the destruction of the moral fiber of American society wielded by this man Trump is incalculably great. This destruction emanates both from the nether reaches of his dark and disturbed character and from the moral... That's true. Nothing to say here I think is an exaggeration, hyperbole, and it's certainly not a lie as I understand. I try to be truthful as I see it and speak to the words. And if it involves a type of extremity of language, it's because I think the concrete reality proportionally warrants that type of language. I don't particularly favor name calling as a form of discourse from the platform, but I got to call the truth as I see it, okay, in that regard. And it requires a type of language which I contend is proportionate and not hyperbolic to the realities that we confront, okay. I can be challenged on that like anything else, but this destruction, okay, emanates both from, as I'm saying, the dark and disturbed character and from the moral consequences of the policies to which he's dedicated. And though I abjure simple and facile psychologizations of human behavior, including political behavior, it is difficult to conclude that his policies are, it's difficult to deny, I should say, that his policies are a pretty direct product of that dark character. But first, I want to engage in a historical aside. When I think of Donald Trump and the morality that underlies his political worldview, my mind turns to the 17th century political thinker Thomas Hobbes. Okay, a little bit of sort of intellectual and political history here. It was Thomas Hobbes who created the modern democratic state, in which the power of government comes not from God above, as it did in the Middle Ages, but from the people below. But Hobbes' state is not one that you or I would want to live in. Hobbes' state is one in which the state is autocratic and all-powerful, and the people in it have but one right, and that is the right to life, which it is the obligation of the state or the sovereign, the government, to protect. And why does Hobbes promote a state that is all-powerful? The answer lies in his understanding of human nature. For Hobbes, the human being is nothing other than a biological creature motivated by his instincts and his drives. Furthermore, for Hobbes, the human being has no cooperative or social instinct. Rather, he proclaims that the human individual, and the word individual has to be underlined, that the human individual by nature is nothing other than an egotistical, selfish, and aggressive. And in a state of freedom, men left to their own devices would, in short order, end up killing each other, and anarchy would reign. And so we need, he concludes, we need an all-powerful tyrannical state to essentially sit on top of society in order to prevent human beings from doing themselves in, because we are by nature aggressive, selfish, and so on and so forth. So we need a powerful state. Indeed, Hobbes, we could argue, had compelling reasons to feel this way, since he was witness to the great wars of religion between Catholics and Protestants, in which those factions were saturating the soil of Europe with endless pools of blood, often for reasons that boiled down to picayune little differences of religious doctrine. Okay. Indeed, for Hobbes, as he put it, the state of human society, and these words have become very well known, the nature of human society is, quote, a war of each against all. That is his picture of the human condition. And in a famous line from his seminal political treatise, The Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes describes human nature by saying that the life of man, and this is often repeated, it's a real downer, the life of man is, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Okay, that's Thomas Hobbes's view. Now, why do I mention this? It's a very grim vision. Okay, very grim vision. And I may be giving Donald Trump more credit than he deserves, but I tend to think that Trump's vision of the world is not all that much different than that put forward by Thomas Hobbes. Indeed, Trump, counseled by Steve Bannon, frequently depicts the American condition as dystopian, dark, and in apocalyptic terms, which again resonates with a Hobbesian worldview. I'm not exaggerating this by much. I really think it's a particular mindset which has its precedence. When it comes to the destruction of moral values, it seems that Trump is a type of anti-moral figure, if that's possible. What follows, I think, are some points in evidence which are probably as well known to you as they are to me. Take, for example, Trump's disastrous decision on Thursday to remove the United States from the Paris Climate Accords. I listened to that speech. I had trouble listening to it, but I did. I forced myself to listen to it. I listened to that speech, which was bolstered with the incantation of self-contradictory statements and dubious facts, which is what you would expect. But the tone of it was extremely distressing and typically Trump. Its central narrative, its central motif was a whining screed as to how America is continuously victimized by foreign powers. What Paris is, he proclaimed, is primarily a giveaway of billions of dollars to foreign countries that have already taken away our jobs. Much is demanded of us, he asserted, but nothing of them, which leaves them laughing at us, he said. Trump frequently describes the United States as a victim of China, a victim of terrorists, a victim of immigrants, a nation that never gets its fair share, and so on and so forth. And one has to conclude that he is again appealing, I think, to his base of Midwestern older whites who themselves feel themselves victimized by predatory forces outside. That's the psychology, the confluence. We depict America as a victim. The whole motif of victimization has a type of psychological resonance with his base, so to speak, that bolsters off. It's a political appeal, as well as something that I'm sure he believes. There may be something of a self-fulfilling prophecy, however, in Trump's cries of victimhood. By pulling out of the Paris Accords, we are simply ceding world leadership to the Chinese, who are racing ahead to fill the vacuum by America and capture the burgeoning market created, the future markets created by the alternative energy revolution. We are being left behind. He is removing America from its historical place on the world stage in terms of world leadership. For more than 80 years, the United States has been the leader on the world stage with a unique role in international affairs. But history will note, I think, that it was Donald Trump who removed us from that stage. And for what? On the dubious notion that we're going to create a few dirty energy fossil fuel jobs. Okay? It's just think of it. But I contend, talking about the motif of victimization, it's my view that there's little dignity in being a victim. By portraying the United States in victimized terms, Trump deflates our national pride while raising the dynamics of anger, revenge, if not violence, towards others. At least it's an exceedingly small-minded way to appeal to the American public and its constituency. Moreover, the dynamic of victimization, which divides the world into victims and their victimizers, is, I believe, a component of Trump's larger worldview that explains much about his policies and his persona. Look at it this way for a moment. Broadly speaking, we can assess human moral dispositions on a continuum of competition on one pole and cooperation on the other. Competition and cooperation. On the individual level, competition is predicated on a self-protective, self-centered orientation in which people are driven to maximize their power and their dominion over others. Amassing power, whether physical strength, wealth, or brute control, is the name of the game. The competitive drive and what follows from it is based on selfishness and reflects a Hobbesian view of oneself and others and how people behave. This explains, I believe, Donald Trump, both again in terms of his policies and in terms of his personality. His commitment to, quote, America first is grounded in a competitive ethos and selfishness writ large. It is a valorization of nationalism that pits America against the world, a world which is poised to take advantage of us and do us in. It is either us or them, and he sees others, whether foreign nations or immigrants or whatever, as the enemy. It is for this reason that Trump is an isolationist who decries globalism. He has no commitment to diplomacy and is dedicated to increasing still further America's military power, including weaponry that in great measure is not even functional in military conflicts in the 21st century. He seeks to inflate still further an overly inflated Pentagon, while positions and offices in the State Department remain vacant. Okay? The West has worked hard since World War II to build up a structure of global international alliances through diplomacy, trade, and creating an elaborate but fragile architecture of human rights. Okay? And Trump is, in barely 4 months, is destroying this architecture and America's place in the world with simply breathtaking speed. Okay? Trump is contemptuous of all this, the global architecture, the diplomacy, the world that we've tried to stitch together. He places a premium on hard power and sees no value in so-called soft power. That is the security and influence that America has achieved in the eyes of the world through being a beacon of democracy, for standing for human rights, through foreign aid for the development of poor countries, that has provided for maternal care, has assisted in eradicating dreaded diseases, that has been a haven for security for refugees and victims of war, for being a place where foreign graduate students could come to get a first-class education in this country. If America has, quote, been, quote, great, okay, it is because it has been a standard bearer to the world of these humane values, which have rightly been a source of pride and in fact make us stronger, not weaker. Trump seems not to understand this, or he does not care, as he pursues an almost adolescent commitment to brute power predicated again on a competitive worldview and an ethos of selfishness writ large. But human beings, I would argue, are more than selfish and competitive, okay? My friends in the Ethical Culture Society know that very well. That's why we're here, what animates us. They are also, human beings are also altruistic and cooperative by nature. David Brooks, who writes for the New York Times and whom I don't always admire, I admit sometimes does get it right. Such was the case in a column that he wrote in the paper just last Thursday, the day when the Accords, when Trump pulled out of the Paris Accords. He said following, quote, it's a very nice quote, very nicely written too, he writes well. He says, powerful, selfish people have always adopted a dirty-minded realism to justify their own selfishness. The problem is that this philosophy is based on an error about human beings, and it leads to self-destructive behavior in all cases. The error is that it misunderstands what drives human action. Of course people are driven by selfish motivations for individual status, wealth, and power. But they are also motivated by another set of drives, for solidarity, for love, and moral fulfillment, that are equally and sometimes more powerful. People are wired to cooperate. Far from being a flimsy thing, the desire for cooperation is the primary human evolutionary advantage we have over other animals. People have a moral sense, he says. They have a set of universal intuitions that help establish harmony between peoples. From their first moments, children are wired to feel others' pain. You don't have to teach a child about what fairness is. They already know. There's no society on earth where people are admired for running away in battle or for lying to their friends. People have moral emotions, Brooks says. They feel rage at injustice, disgust towards greed, reverence for excellence, awe before the sacred, and elevation in the face of goodness. People yearn for righteousness. They want to feel meaning and purpose in their lives, that their lives are oriented toward the good. People are attracted by goodness and repelled by selfishness. Very nice words. I think we can feel this many times over, and I felt it when I read about those 3 men who stood up on a trolley car in Portland to, I wonder whether I would have done that, you know? Very admirable. The three men who stood up against a white supremacist who was tormenting two young African-American women, one of them in a hijab, okay? And as a result of them, two lost their lives. The assailant killed them with it, stabbed them with a knife, and the other one was sent to the hospital. But it's that type of intervention that speaks to a whole different set of values that are extraordinarily admirable and are as part of human nature as much as self-interested, selfish values are. And we all can cite examples of that. We're removed and uplifted by the goodness that we see, the altruism we see in the human spirit. But Donald Trump, again, seems to have no sense of these values. And all of us are paying a very heavy price for it. But this competitive, selfish ethos, centered on combativeness and brute power, is manifest in his persona as well as his policies. As we all know, his personal ethics are vile, thuggish, and incalculably disgusting. More appropriate, I would say, for Nazi brown shirts than the President of the United States and the leader of the free world. Refrains of "lock her up," his inciting violence at his rallies, his crude, obscene disparaging of women, are shocking, or maybe we've already seen so much of it that we're no longer so shocked when we hear it. Okay. But the larger picture, I think, is vested in the social consequences of our president's behavior. I contend that the damage done to the moral fabric of our society is both ominous and very lamentable. With the election of Barack Obama to the presidency, I personally really did think that America was turning a corner. Not that we had overcome racism, but we had turned a corner, and that we were trying hard to put the ugly legacy of racism and hatred of others behind us. But Donald Trump, as we know, has given every bigot, racist, xenophobe, misanthrope, anti-Semite, and all-purpose hater legitimacy to come out of the closet to spew his hatred with abandon and with sanction of the most powerful person in the land. To turn a beautiful phrase rendered by Abraham Lincoln on its head, Trump indeed appeals to the worst angels of our nature. Okay. I can only imagine, personally, the challenge of parents who, needing to contend with the dangers of drugs, premature sexuality, a predatory and sleazy entertainment and commercial culture, now have to concoct what they have to do to concoct reasons and explanations for their 9-year-old child with regard to their president's behavior, and have to shield Trump from their kid's view as one would an X-rated movie or some other obscenity that you would encounter in the culture. That's what I think parents, I don't have small children, but I suspect that's what parents agonizingly have to do, is concoct reasons why you should avert your gaze from the president, who ought to be a source of authority and admiration. Okay, that's where we come. But of course, there's much more that reveals what kind of strange man Donald Trump is. I must admit that I did read with lurid fascination and a little bit of schadenfreude, which is not one of our more admirable emotions, I should say. I'm human like everyone else. I must admit that I read with a little lurid fascination the following description penned by the respected journalist Elizabeth Drew in the current edition of the New York Review of Books. Drew writes the following, okay. From the stories that emanate from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the impression one gets is that Trump is a nearly impossible person to work for. He screams at his staff when they tell him something he doesn't want to hear. He screams at them as he watches television news for hours on end and sees stories about himself that he doesn't like, which is most of the time. Some White House staff are polishing their resumes. Leaks are also being made by the intelligence community, many of whom see Trump as a national menace. People who have been in the Oval Office have come away stunned by Trump's minimal attention span, his appalling lack of information, his tendency to say more than he knows. Intelligence, I really got this metaphor, this description. Intelligence officials have been instructed to put as much of his daily briefing as possible in the form of pictures.
Cartoons.
This is the President of the United States. I can't read a text. He's got to look at pictures? Are they cartoons? I'm wondering what kind of pictures is he looking at. I mean, this is amazing. Aides have been subject to public embarrassment by his propensity for changing his story, end quote. And one can only wonder how long they can continue to cover for him as they twist themselves into pretzels before they break. And all of us are probably asking ourselves how and when this nightmare is going to end. One can look at the moral, by contrast, one can look at the moral earnestness of a Jimmy Carter or the exemplary dignity of a Barack Obama and only weep. Okay. If I had 100 hours for this platform, I would not nearly have enough time to enumerate and expound on the immoral qualities of our current president and the damage inflicted on our society, and beyond that, on our planet. The litany is very, very long. But beyond the nationalistic power-amassing, egoistic, competitive worldview, beyond the thorough lack of concern for others, the lack of compassion and empathy, as manifested in his disparaging of vulnerable immigrants, refugees, the disabled, and as manifested in his sadistic health care plan, even more than his thuggery, I think the most damaging thing to the moral fiber of American society may be simply the pervasive mendacity of this man, which he wields with total abandon and seemingly with no sense of inconsistency, shame, or conscience. Needless to say, all politicians lie. All politicians exaggerate. We know that, and we in fact expect it. We can almost say that it goes with the territory. But Donald Trump is simply in a category all his own. Like a 5-year-old, he just makes it up. He seems to live much of his life in his own illusions. For other people in public office, lying may be the exception, but with Donald Trump, it is the norm. He lies continually, transparently, and one is left at sea, not knowing if anything that comes out of his mouth is truthful. We are left floating in an ocean of lies and totally ungrounded. When the President of the United States evinces no respect for honesty whatsoever, such is very destructive, I believe, at least for two reasons. First, if the President has no regard for truth and lies either on whim or when it suits his interest to lie, then he is sending, I think, a powerful message. I am sure that there are many people with shaky commitments to honesty and loose consciences who look at the President in his exemplary role and conclude, if the President can lie for his reasons, then I can lie for mine. I can act on impulse, as the President does, and not be bothered by standards of honesty or truthfulness. Again, if truthfulness is the mortar that ultimately holds society together, then Donald Trump is potentially doing great damage to social cohesion and to the medium of honest discourse and loyalty to facts that people must attain for the social fabric to remain strong. And certainly, at a basic minimum, he debases the level of discourse, verbal discourse and communication, how we present ourselves and speak in the culture as a whole. But having the President who is a chronic liar is incalculably dangerous for national security. I have always been skeptical of what presidents have to say, but beyond my skepticism, I've also believed that they were sometimes being honest, and that I have felt an important need to bring my critical faculties to bear to determine when they are being truthful and when they're not. But with Donald Trump, my skepticism, perhaps yours, is total. I believe this president is never telling the truth. And of course, I am not the only one to feel this way. That includes the leaders of other foreign powers, people in government, and so on and so forth. But if the president cannot be believed, what in effect will ensue in cases of a national emergency? What will eventuate, as is plausible, that the United States will again suffer another serious terrorist attack, or maybe Kim Jong-un will lob one of his newly developed missiles that'll somewhere land in Guam or the shores of Alaska or something like that, and the president needs to summon the American people and our allies to respond. What will happen given that Trump has zero credibility and simply can't be believed? Your imagination is as prescient as mine, but I don't think the answer to that can be a very good one. I think it throws the whole issue of American security, yours and mine and the nation's, in disarray. If the person at the top, you simply don't know what he's coming out of his mouth is truthful or not, or he contradicts himself every 3 minutes. It is a very, very dangerous situation in a dangerous world. Okay? In closing, let me just say, I'll bring this to an end. In closing, we are on a very wild ride, and dark and dangerous turns will be with us for time unknown. Let's hope it's short. In the meanwhile, we can take, I believe, some real hope from the resistance to the Trump nightmare as it continues, and I'm very proud to say that our ethical society is part of that resistance. Again, our founder, Felix Adler, said that we confront frustration. We have a sense of ideals and we have a sense of reality, and we don't meet the ideals, and so we're always thrown back on our frustrations or our limitations. But Adler further believed that as we experience frustration in terms of our values and ideals, what that very often does is it causes us to reverence our ideals even more greatly. It basically commits us to wanting to struggle harder to reach them, not less. And I think that that's what's happening in America. I take hope from those mayors, for example, who have declared their cities sanctuaries in defiance of an inhumane deportation policy. I love that states, including California, New York, and Washington, many cities, and interesting enough, innumerable corporations who have been the bastions of conservatism, including no less ExxonMobil, have declared their allegiance to the Paris Climate Accords in defiance of Trump's benighted, retrograde, and stupid policies. And they're actually, the mayors are now contacting the Secretary General of the United Nations, and they're asking, we know the Paris Accord is made for countries, but can we, as cities, buy into it? Good for them! I mean, that's a source of hope. I love it. And may it continue. And we've got to keep it up on the ground to make sure that these other leaders, and when it comes to American exemplarship, we've got plenty of good people who we can put in the place of the president, whom we need to follow, emulate, and be inspired by. Okay? There's a source of hope. We can take hope, as I'm saying, my last word in this resistance. And let me say, may it continue. May it spread wider across the land, and may it grow stronger and louder. And as this darkness lifts, as we hope one day it will, may we usher in a new day and a new enlightened leadership that with intelligence and dignity will evoke from us, indeed, the better angels of our nature.